Right, welcome to week 2 of your online history videos. I hope you all have had a happy and safe holiday weekend and you're here and ready to learn for week 2. This week we are going to be talking about early 19th century reform. We're going to be talking about the women's spheres, the men's spheres, how work changed during the Industrial Revolution. We're going to talk about education reform and just how American culture changed vastly at the beginning of the 19th century. So we are going to start off with talking about how work changed for the average day American. So we've learned about all the changes in America's geography in the 1800s with the Louisiana Purchase. As the United States grew in size, pioneers moved west into new lands. Changes were also taking place in the Northeast. So last week we focused on the West. Now we're going to focus on the Northeast of America and how the Industrial Revolution changed work and the daily life for many Americans. All right, so in fact, a revolution was taking place. It wasn't a war type of revolution. It was a social revolution and a technological revolution. This revolution brought huge changes in work, society, and the home. In colonial times, most work was done in homes and small businesses. Craftspeople learned specific trades and created things for their families and communities. These might be blacksmiths, woodworkers, bakers, or even shoemakers. These craftspeople provided for local needs within their specific community. The Industrial Revolution changed the new way of life. New inventions were created and factories were built. These factories made goods faster and shipped them to places beyond just the local communities. Craftspeople were no longer at the center of the community. Daily life was changing. In 1790, the first factory was built in America, in Rhode Island. This factory was built by Samuel Slater and it ran on water power and created textiles or fabric. Slater had emigrated from England after working in a cotton mill. When he arrived in the United States, he built the factory and began producing fabric. With a large factory, he needed many workers. He turned to families. He built places for families to live called tenements and put all the members of the family to work. Can you imagine being a child and working in a factory? Children are used to working on farms at a young age, but factories were different. They had to work long days inside, often without any light, little except from the outside. When it came time to get paid, men made the most money, obviously. Women usually made about half of what men made, and children made even less than that. Textile factories were just the beginning. Other types of factories were also being built, including steel, flour mills, ironworks, and even printing. Workers in a factory would do one specific job over and over and over again. It was very efficient and it made things be built faster, but it was also very boring and tedious to the workers. Factory workers worked long hours with very little pay. Advances in transportation also helped the Industrial Revolution. The factories needed a way to transport all the goods they were producing to cities and towns very far away. The new canals, roads, and railways that were being built at this time took goods faster and further than ever before. They also made it possible to transport larger quality and quantity of items. Factories produced many goods to meet the new demands happening all over the country. All right, so next we're going to talk about what family life was like during this time. What was family like in the Northeast during the Industrial Revolution? Changes were occurring in work and society, which also meant changes in family life. Previously, families had worked together to maintain a farm and meet the family's basic needs. As the Industrial Revolution made it possible to earn more money and buy things instead of making them, a new group of people emerged, the middle class. These were families that had enough money to provide their basic needs as well as other things they wanted. Middle-class families developed specific roles for men and women in society. A man's role was to work and earn money to support the family. He would be in the public sphere, creating wealth. Meanwhile, the women stayed in the women's sphere, which meant that they were in charge of their private houses and private lives. Women were expected to keep a beautiful home and display their wealth, while also taking care of domestic tasks. Think about how the family changes. In previous time, men and women had to work together to survive. Now they had their own private spheres of work. Do you think these were good changes? Was it positive for society? Or did it create even more of a schism, even more of a fine line between men and women? All right, so what happened during this time with reform? Did it open any opportunities for other classes of people that previously didn't have any? The Industrial Revolution is mainly seen as a time of huge progress in American society. There were new inventions and goods were being made and transported at a record pace. There are more opportunities for people to earn money and move up in society. Remember, we're creating a middle class. Now there is not a distinct poor and a distinct wealthy class. You didn't have to be one or the other. There was a middle class that, while meeting your basic needs as a human being, food, shelter, clothing, they were also able to buy things that brought them joy or happiness, something beyond the necessity of daily life. Okay? There were more opportunities for people to earn money and move up in society. Unfortunately, this change also had some unwanted side effects. Many people's lives became worse in this new society. Most factories paid very low wages and workers were housed close together in horrible conditions. Women and African Americans often experienced the worst discrimination and exploitation. Many Americans spoke out and wanted to help those in need. This time was called the Second Great Awakening. The Great Awakening was a time of both religious changes and social reforms. Let's look at some of the reformers who tried to make society better and give everyone better opportunities, not just the rich. The most famous reformer of this time was Charles Finney. Charles Finney was a Presbyterian minister. He had some religious ideas that seemed radical at this time. He held revivals, which he traveled around and held big spiritual church services, trying to save souls. These were charismatic leaders. They preyed on your vulnerabilities. They wanted to persuade you. They were very, very gregarious. They wanted to appeal to your human nature and your need for God in your life. They promised salvation if you gave up wanting things. If you lived like a person who accepted what they had and lived with it, then you were closer to God. As the person who wanted more and was never happy with what they had, you were seen as having the devil inside you. So the Second Great Awakening preyed on people's vulnerabilities and turned them to God so that they would feel good about themselves during this time. He also encouraged women to speak up at prayer meetings, which was unusual for the time. Most importantly, he stressed that men and women should work for social reform to make life better for all. So religion played an important role in reform because it also, if you were religious, you wanted to do better in your community. You wanted opportunity equally for men and women, for African Americans, for Native Americans, okay? So there was great reform change during this time, and religion helped push it through the mainstream or help people accept that. Although women were expected to stay in the women's sphere, many women spoke up to try to change society as well. Lucretia Mott was a woman who spoke up to try to end slavery. She lived in Boston and Philadelphia. Many people in society did not think a woman should speak in public. They did not like it when she spoke in front of crowds and gave her opinion. Lucretia persisted and spent her life working not only to end slavery, but also to champion women's rights. She fought to give women and African Americans better opportunities for freedom, education, and the right to vote. Dorothea Dix, a writer who advocated for a different group in need, she wanted to help the mentally ill. At the time, people with mental illnesses were sent to prisons. They were then treated very poorly. It was common for these prisoners to be beaten, chained, and starved. Dorothea Dix studied this problem both in England and the United States. She wrote a report and took her findings to the Massachusetts legislature. She asked them to make hospitals for those with mental illnesses, instead of putting them in prisons. They agreed and gave more funding to the hospitals. Dorothea Dix continued her work for many years to help expand medical hospitals in the United States and in Great Britain. All right, so you guys are hearing some of the reform during this time. There was many, many movements. There's the temperance movements as well. Okay, so we are expanding our communities from small towns to larger cities. Okay, how did work change though, specifically? Well, the Industrial Revolution changed America in many ways. One main change was the nature of work, especially for women. Before the Industrial Revolution, most women worked hard in and around their homes to provide for their families' needs. Women would farm, sew, cook, or trade with other local people. As the Industrial Revolution was happening, many women went to work in factories with their children. Let's look at some of the lives of women who worked during this time. Here's an account of Kathryn Pearson, who is a fictional character in a historical fiction novel. This is an excerpt from a book. This is what she writes about living in a boarding house full of women. Read the following excerpt that describes her room, which held 4 women. So this is the kind of conditions she would have to live in during this time. 4 to a room was in itself a luxury, as most of the rooms held 6. Even so, there was hardly any space to walk around the double beds, the 2 tiny nightstands, and the various trunks and bandboxes of the inhabitants. There was no place to sit except on the beds, but then, on a regular workday, there was no leisure time except the less than 3 hours between supper and curfew. Most of the girls spent their measure of free time down in the parlor or dining room or out of town, where there were shows and lectures and even dances, all run by honest citizens bent on parting the working girls from their wages. What can you learn about daily life from her account? How do you think she felt living in a crowded room with 3 other girls after living on a farm? Kathryn Pearson also describes the working conditions of the mill. Imagine this girl's surprise the first time she walks into a factory. She's used to working on a farm, tending animals and crops. Now she works in a factory with lots of people and lots of noise, nonstop. Creation, what noise, clatter and clack, great shuddering moans and groans and creaks and rattles, the shrieks and whistles of huge leather belts on wheels. It would have been quite a shocking sight to see as someone who grew up in the small county in the country, used to the relative quiet of the farm. To be able to hear all the machines and all the clank and clamor, it was extremely loud being in a room with hardly any windows and all these machines just against the wall. The rows in between sewing machines and the sewing quarters was so dangerous that if you moved one wrong step, you could get your hem of your dress in a sewing machine caught and you could die that way. There was no workers' comp. There was no one checking to make sure that workers' needs were being taken care of. So even though the Industrial Revolution was great for all the inventions it gave us, it helped with the social reform, there was also lots of accidents happening, lots of deaths that could have been prevented because people were not taking care of the workers. This was the beginning of a capitalist society. We wanted to do more to get more money. The more we could produce, the more money we could have. So if we could work a person 12 hours, we would, and we wouldn't pay him that well because he needed the money to survive, and we needed him to work so that we could produce our product at a rate that is acceptable and that would make us more money. It was a transactional relationship. And as reform of the 19th century progresses, you're going to see a lot of people start to reform the ways that factories are run and who is getting educated. So now that it's open to more people, work is open to more people are getting more education. Now that we see the problems, we're going to go back and try to fix the problems that the reform created in the first place. And we're not going to see that towards the end of the Industrial Revolution. All right, so I know that was a lot. I know that you know some about the Industrial Revolution, but I wanted to talk a little bit more about the big change between coming from a rural farm to an industrial society where factories and big buildings and smoke and cars are everywhere at this point. It's a huge shift in America's economy and America's social dynamic. It changes almost everything about American culture at that time. So I am going to show you the question that I would like you to write down. This is going to be an open-ended question, so I would like you to write either a 2-paragraph response or a 1-paragraph response addressing the question, okay? So you're gonna pause the video here. I'm gonna try to get it all on the screen for you. Now's the time to pause it, and you're gonna write down the question in your notebook, okay? And then you are gonna show me your answers if you would like to share them with me or discuss your answers or what your thoughts are about this video Monday morning at 9:30, okay? So remember, you're only coming to the Zoom meetings at 9:30 if you have any academic questions for me or if you want to show your answers or discuss any of your answers with your class. All right? All right, I will see you guys on Zoom tomorrow. Bye.